What happened to the bad kids you went to school with? One guy who picked on me in high school ended up working under me a couple years later. I was like 20 and basically lead hand for a small shift of overnight workers at a blue collar plant. Having all the maturity of your typical 20-year-old, I always gave him the shittiest tasks until he finally quit. Taught me two lessons. First, petty revenge is fun. Second, it is probably best if I don't hold management type positions. Went to school with a kid who we all knew was the bad kid even in 3rd grade. He was always in trouble, acting up, touching people. He got kicked out of high school for hiding in the girls' locker room stall to watch them change. He got arrested for kidnapping and raping a woman a few years later. He was part of a prison break a few years later, was out for about a week, got recaptured. He was subsequently sentenced to life in Supermax. I think there were surprisingly also a few charges for things he did in jail. TL/DR, the bad kid grows up to be a pretty bad guy. I've managed to find a few of the ones I knew on Facebook, and the 10 years since high school seems to have changes some, others not so much. The biggest bully of my class is serving a very lengthy sentence for beating a cop until he was quadriplegic. The second biggest bully I knew is doing some type of construction job and seems to be doing pretty well for himself with a wife and 2 kids. The biggest stoner I knew joined the Marine Corps, which is pretty surprising. He has a lot of pictures of himself doing outdoorsy type things. The goth kid who everyone thought would go Columbine is now working at a pizza place, still looks pretty goth-like. Guess it wasn't just a fad. The rich mean girls type pretty girl is still rich and still pretty. Her boyfriend looks a lot like Ryan Gosling. She's a nurse now. Biggest shocker was the fuck this place guy. He's doing a long prison sentence for beating an off-duty cop until he was quadriplegic. Biggest bully I ever knew. Still never thought he'd go that far. The one guy that bullied me ended up working for Chick-fil-A and is now a district manager for the franchisee in the area. He has a nice wife and is expecting. I ran into him a few years ago. He apologized for being a dick to me. Apparently he was angry at the time because I was in both the special education classes and the gifted and talented program. He was just in the special ed classes. He's way more successful than me now. I don't dislike him or anything. It just goes to show what motivation and a good work effort can get you. I wish him all the best. Whenever I had a bad day at school with bullies, my mother used to tell me about a kid that pulled her hair in grade school and bullied her all the time. She used to relate with a calm smirk that about 5 years out of high school he was found shot to death in the trunk of a car. I always thought she had something to do with it, or wished she had. One kid, never even graduated, lives down the road from me. I can't even make up some of the ridiculous shit he does. His driver license is suspended, so I've seen him riding around on a chopper bicycle. It's decked out in Shapard drawings, an American flag jabbed into the seat, and I believe a Romney/Ryan sticker. Most recently I walked past his house and saw a plastic chair, table, and a grill perched up on the garage roof. It beats me how he managed to get it all up there. I bullied someone in high school. Badly. Years later I called him up and apologized. Edit. What did I do to him? Nothing physical. I went to a private high school and anyone throwing a punch would have been out in a second. But I was verbally abusive. Made sure other kids didn't like him. I had my own problems for the record. Basically I gave him grief. Wasn't calling him 3-time another form of abuse? Not really. I called him the first time, which he was not expecting, and we chatted for a few minutes. Normal stuff like careers and family. Then when I started to ask for forgiveness, he hung up on me mid-sentence. I called him back and got his voicemail. I basically said that I was sorry and that if I could go back in time I would talk some sense into my teenage self. But that couldn't do that obviously. I went on to say that we lived in different parts of the country and that I had nothing to gain from making the call other than that I was sorry. After that I waited a year to make the third call. When he picked up he said, "I am Harinthia. Thanks so much for calling. We got cut off last year when you called. I don't know what happened. Anyway, just wanted you to know that I forgive you. We were in high school and it was a long time ago. Hope you're doing well." For the record, he seemed relieved as well. And that's it. Well, one of the bad kids I used to hang with is a skinhead with 5 kids. So, yay. Another is dead. He was tweaking and ran onto the freeway and was hit by like 5 cars. This was in the mid-90s. Everyone else is darn alright, although it's kind of freaking me out how many people have died from cancer at this point. One just got arrested for stealing a cop's gun and giving it, not selling, just giving it away, to a convict who was on parole for gun violations. 10 or so have already had kids and have moved to random parts of the country. One died of heroin odd. One committed suicide. Most actually just work at auto shops, as far as I know. Source: I used to hang out with a lot of the bad kids. The worst one was a Kurdish guy. In elementary school he was like, "Do you think I'm stronger? Let's fight." He had always aggression problems. Later in high school, he was already a criminal. Beat people and stole their cell phones, sold them. He changed schools, but he was still notorious. He was involved in a huge fight in front of my school. They hit each other with wooden batons. It was crazy. One had even a blank gun, which is a big deal in Germany because we don't have free weapons and stuff. He was in juvenile prison. In his early 20s he was a cocaine addict and sold drugs. I once saw him with a real thug type with a white Porsche. That was when he thought he's untouchable because he know the tough guys. He and his mates beat the Africans who owned the park and a nearby subway station where they sold drugs. He forced some of them to sell for him. You would always see him with fancy cars drifting through the streets and stuff. Always on the white powder. Things changed when he kicked the door in of a big drug dealer who lives with wife and kids. He's the kind of shabby guy, but knows everyone in the city. Spent lots of time in prison and has protection from the local bandits. This Kurdish guy didn't know that. Tried to break in but failed. The drug dealer did not expect that such a small timer breaks into his flat. He thought some real bad guys are coming. He hid wife and kid, called some people, and looked for that Kurdish guy. He found him, and that guy got the worst beating ever. They kidnapped him and his Turkish friend, who was a same thug, and drove them to a roadhouse in Belgium, where they stripped of their clothes and let them naked somewhere on a Belgium highway. After this incident, they knew they cannot fuck around with the big guy. The Turkish dude died a few years ago when he jumped from a building while escaping from the cops. He punched a taxi driver and ran away because he didn't have money. Since then, the Kurd became legal. Opened his shisha cafe which failed. Since then no one ever heard of him. Rumors say he went back to school to get his university entrance qualification. I married him. He was one of the big stoners from my high school. I was the typical band nerd. Graduated with honors from HS and college. We were pretty opposite, personality wise. We met up again by chance 3 years after our high school graduation. He had really matured and stopped smoking by that time. He turned out to be quite the charmer. I will always remember a guy who used to pick on me in school. It started in elementary when he'd pick on my friends and I'd try to stand up for them, so he'd just pick on me. He was such a jerk and was unliked by virtually everyone. In high school I remember finding out that he had killed himself by hanging himself with his father's tie. Supposedly his dad was more concerned about the tie than his own son. It really made me wish I had just tried to talk to him. As they say, hurt people, I'll never forget him. Some got pregnant and never got a chance to pursue careers. Some grew up, regretted their actions, and made something of themselves. Some got a low-paying job and just lived day to day. And all of that is fine, really. It's cool, even. I'm happy for them all. Back when I was still dating my wife, so, pre-marriage, her brother introduced me to his best friend, who I got pretty close with. We had a lot in common, played music together, had the same sense of humor, and smoked weed together. One day we got pretty high, and he told me about the horrible people he went to high school with, and brought up this girl who was like the Regina George of his high school, except in his words, worse. She was elitist, a bully, and scarred a lot of kids in school with her mean remarks regarding their style choice, social standing, and family's financial instability. I could relate, so I told him my story about a similar girl who went to high school with me. We then compared our stories and came to the conclusion that his Regina George was worse. Fast forward a few years later to a few months ago, I find out that his Regina George is my wife. So yeah. Fellow bad kid here. I vandalized my school extensively when I was in grade 9 with a friend one night and caused $90,000 in damages to the school by turning off their vac units in the middle of winter. I was obviously expelled and had to go on youth probation and pay a fine, and it was a shitty time. So I think I qualify as the bad kid of the school. Anyways, where am I now? Because of the youth probation, I was ordered to do 50 hours of community service. I went to a RIMCA, or a boys and girls club of my town, volunteered to be their administrator, and got the experience on my resume, which landed me another 2 years at an IT company doing Windows 7 deployments and break fix of desktop, laptop, and printer hardware. I have now completed my second round of interviews at an accounting firm as their local IT guy. I really don't regret what I have done, as it has helped me gain the experience needed to get my foot in the door with my career. There was a kid from my elementary school who lived 2 doors down from my childhood home. He who would bully me and my family incessantly for the better part of a decade when I was younger. It was terrible. He would pick on me and brother on our walks home from school, throw garbage at our house, call us names, carry out minor acts of vandalism on our house. Just general stupid shit that kids do. I think he came from a broken home, and his mother, no sign of the father, would just sit and sunbathe and watch all this shit go down. Good parenting. The kid dropped out of high school a year or 2 in and basically became a bum and or potential substance abuser. A few years ago I learned that he was living and partying it up in Thailand. Apparently, he was pulled under a train and died. The circumstances are unclear, but the rumor is that drugs and or alcohol may have been involved. Upon learning this, I didn't feel anything in particular. Kind of like, oh, okay. I didn't necessarily wish bad things to happen to him, but I can't say that I was all too surprised to learn of his fate. You reap what you sow, I guess. It's a real shame that he didn't make better choices in life. Not long after that, I learned that the kid's older brother, not as much of a bully as I recall, was killed in a motor vehicle collision in Malaysia. Now, that's really unfortunate. Altogether there were 3 kids in that family. The 2 boys and the girl. The girl was in my class at school. I wonder how she's doing. I hope she's okay. From what I remember, she seemed cool, for the most part. Except for that one time she chased me around with a water gun on the street in front of my house. One girl I went to school with was pretty nice, but she'd had a rough childhood and was understandably angry. We got along okay in high school, since I never did anything to make her mad enough to lash out, but we weren't really friends, just classmates. We both finished high school and I assumed we'd never really see each other again. Edit. I think she may have dropped out, come to think of it. Later on, I was working at a poorly run, but that's another story, homeless shelter, and I found out she'd not only been a resident, but she'd also been banned for dropping her stuff off and leaving for days to go on drug binges. I had to clean her stuff out of the single women's room and store it in the office. It all fit into this cute little mermaid bag, and there wasn't much outside of a few small items and a couple of changes of underwear. Eventually she came back for it, clearly still on something, talking a mile a minute. I gave it back to her with a scarf from the donated clothes, since it was freezing out. She was pretty stoked about the scarf, I think. Not too soon after that, this happened. Ontario woman jailed on drug charges in Peru. I think about her sometimes. I hope she's okay, but as time goes on I really doubt she is. It's sad. She was a bit of a bad kid I guess, but she deserved so much better. The couple that made a DVD of their prom night and sold it on the internet didn't make it. Shocker. He's a youth minister now. She's a stay-at-home mom with fibromyalgia. I'm sure I spelled that wrong, but I'm too lazy to Google it, and not lazy enough to now write out this explanation. Some of them are doing surprisingly well, none of them going to college, but holding down jobs. I do have a bigger story about one, though. There was a kid in my high school who used to gamble a lot and ended up getting lent a lot of money. This was around 11th grade, around 5 to 6 grand. He didn't pay it back, and word got around that he was being looked for by a bunch of drug dealer types. Last thing I heard was that he set someone on fire after an argument and headed straight to state pen. Over the years I've heard of or bumped into the bullies from my high school and primary school. Some are dead, some are morbidly obese. A slim minority picked up their acts and actually became worthwhile members of society. One in particular is now couch surfing, always briefly, because people get sick of him quickly, has been shot at least once, pisses off the wrong people, is going from job to job as he keeps getting fired, and even his parents wants nothing to do with him anymore. Makes me so happy. That may be a mean thing to say, but he made my life hell. Our school didn't have bad kids in the sense that they bullied people, as far as I know. Most of the popular kids though now have multiple kids and no job, are divorced, about to be divorced, or have baby daddies / mamas. They also post things on Facebook that, although amusing, is pretty sad when you really think about it. The kid was a typical redneck, about 2 years ahead of me, and a giant dick to everyone. Got called up to do some farm work last summer in my hometown, and guess who happened to be called in as well? I hated him in high school, but after seeing him again, I just pity him. The guy has no prospects, and no real skills to get anywhere, and he's still a raging asshole. Almost all of the rich pretty types who bullied me are now single mothers or physical therapists. At our school, physical therapy is what you went into if you weren't good at anything but sports. All the guys. Most are druggies, but some of the rich ones, one of which literally raped a girl while we were in HS and got off scot-free. BC his dad was a lawyer, are partying away at easy schools, training to be shitty doctors and lawyers like their dads. I was one of them. I was incredibly fucked up due to being born premature with some shitty conditions and being raped in my early teen years. No one knew, I couldn't handle, and I acted out. I mellowed after school, became successful in my career, and spent most of my time trying to help others. Not because I feel guilty, but because after I found myself I got over being raped, and with that I found a huge sense of empathy. I didn't want others to be what I had. I'd always had it, just completely dulled after said incident.